Well, it's noon, 12 o'clock Eastern time anyway, so we'll just gonna dive right in. And I know this is lunchtime for a lot of people, so I certainly don't want to waste that for anybody. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So welcome everybody to the third installment of Skype to Teams transition. Uh, as always, this is Patrick Kelly with my partner Kelly Cleveland. And we run Try This at Work from the Southeast District. We're both CSMs or customer success managers working in the Southeast. So we bring these to be informative, to try to help your progress as you go through the year and go through your Skype to Teams transition. If you've seen part one was where we reviewed all the modalities, the modes of migration and transition, the user experience from an end user client from either Teams or Skype, and what that looks like for them as what it looks like for you from the administration part. Part two was the Skype to Teams transition in regards to project management, the regards to how to structure your overall migration, who to get sponsors, how to train your end users as well as your IT staff for the transition. Part three, I think we're going to, not only I think, I know we're going to go into Teams governance and governance in regards to all the things that come into play when it comes to security, compliance, and administration for Teams. There's a lot of things that come into play when it comes to understanding all the operation administrative duties after your Skype to Teams migration, because there's new tools, right? We're no longer using the Skype admin portal. You might no longer be using the on-prem compliance model that you used. You're going to leverage the power of Office 365 and Microsoft 365 for these new functions and modalities. So let's kind of just jump right in. So this slide I always want to refer back to is as a reference point to where you're always going to start the beginning transition from Skype to Teams. You're always going to have to decide on the model of your migration. You've seen this slide in every single one of our webcasts. You're going to probably continue to see it as you go through your journey. But this is one of those slides that you're going to have to be intimately familiar with in regards to your transition and your migration path. We won't go into it deep today because we've already done that, and I'm sure you've done your research on your side. But I also want to leverage this slide because it's a great model for where you're at to where you need to be. And where we are ending is Teams only. And once we get to Teams only, that's where it comes into play of that governance model, right? Because of the new paradigm of operations, and this new application becomes new problems, if you want to call it, or new challenges. How about that? We always like to use the word challenges over problems. So how do you prevent, some of those things from happening in the Teams model as opposed to the Skype model? Let's kind of just go through those, right? In Teams governance, a few things come into play because now we're Teams administrators instead of Skype administrators. What does that entail? So we're going to leverage some new tools in the Microsoft stack, right? Because we're going to go into Azure and our admin tools, and we're going to see how these leverage into the Teams world. One of those is obviously group creation, right? Is the ability to create groups. Who do you give that privilege to and those permissions to? That's part of that governance model. There's no right or wrong answer here, right? It's whatever fits your need and your company requirements. Group naming. This is probably one of the biggest ones when it comes to governance in the Teams world, right? Is that what do we name that group? Because in the old Exchange world, we had our distribution lists and our security groups and our AD model. Everything was kind of restricted to this to make sense, right? So we wanted to have a consistent naming scheme and a consistent naming model for all those AD groups and distribution lists and security groups, and that's great. That's fine. But in group naming, right, is you're giving if you give the power to create groups to individual users and owners of those groups, there's two ways of thought here, right? Is that one, you adhere to standards of protocol for the company, just like we've always done. But also, what about innovation, right? What about just giving the user the ability to name the team, whatever makes sense to the team? Why does it need to be constricted to a standard when that team who are members of that either team or multiple channels, they understand the naming scheme because it's theirs. Why does it need to be named a certain name? Again, no right or wrong answer. It's completely up to you what you'd like to leverage in this regard. Because that's part of the cool thing about Teams is that you can allow that innovation to happen. So allow your users to be creative in their naming process. Allow users to do what fits their team the best. That's what's really cool about it. Group classification is another one, right? Is the ability to classify which groups and teams are involved in the overall scheme of your naming context. A lot of those things, again, are not part of a right or wrong. It's what fits your requirements, and that's the great thing about it. These standards aren't strict; they're flexible and dynamic. And segueing into dynamic membership of groups is another great thing, right? Is that there's not these static things that you have to have owners of that then have to join members and remove members statically. These can be dynamically registered groups, right? So if you are onboarded into the HR group, you can automatically get added to all the teams that you are a part of that you're going to be efficiently and productive with. It's fantastic. Group templates. This is a really cool thing to do, right? So in the Teams world, you obviously create teams, and then you create sub-channels underneath those teams. You can also then create tabs and apps on those teams. But what if you wanted to have that model replicated across? Say you had 200 teams that were exactly structured exactly the same. You wouldn't want to manually create all those yourself. You'd certainly have to use, or you'd want to use what we call group templates, is the ability to utilize an existing team structure to create a new team. It's really cool if you haven't played with it. Guest access is another big one, right? In the Skype model, we had federation, the ability to IM and presence with other companies that had Skype as well. Can certainly do that in the Teams world. We call it external access, giving the ability to communicate with chat and presence with other companies that utilize Teams. But one of those things we've built upon is the guest access part of it. The guest access is the ability to actually collaborate with another partner or entity that has Teams. So not only do you have that IM and presence model, but then you have that complete group collaboration model too. Sharing files, collaborating on documents. All that's the power of Teams. But again, requires administrative tools and adherence to your standards. Here's another one, group expiration. So unlike in the Exchange world, right, where we actually had, you would create a distribution list and then they would just stick around. You didn't have any real ability to understand when they're being used or why they're being used, if you can get rid of them. People are afraid of that in teams, right? Like we create this team, then what if we have this sprawl? We have this group and teams channel sprawl all over the place and all these hundreds of teams are created and they're not used later. Well, the cool thing about Teams is there's built-in expiration to this stuff, right? So if you create a team and then you utilize it for, say, project 1, and then project 2 comes around, right? Project 1 team is no longer used. Well, what happens to that? Does it just stay there forever? Actually, it doesn't. There's group expiration policies that you can set on those teams. So if there's no activity happening in those teams, it actually self-expires. And before it does that, it actually sends an email to the owner saying, hey, by the way, there's no activity in this team. Do you want to keep it around? And they can certainly say yes, but they can, if they don't, it actually expires. So it kind of cleans up itself. Some of the cool stuff that's happening in Teams. So when it comes to deleting teams, you certainly want the ability to recover teams, right? So say project 1 team is deleted. because you no longer use it. But then all of a sudden, project one comes back into play, and then you're going to need all that data. You can certainly recover that.
Patrick, quick question.
Yeah.
What is the standard in terms of from a group expiration standpoint? What's common that we see across customers for that
So a
policy?
lot of times, yeah. So a lot of times companies follow that quarterly path, right? So you can do it. A simple way is to do it 90 days. I've seen 180 days really common, and then you can do 365 as well by default. Certainly, you can do it longer than that, right? In case you have standards and protocols that are in place where you have to have adherence to compliancy review, where you have to have it for longer than that. Completely up to you, and that's the cool thing about it.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So how do we administer all those things, right? Is that we can certainly do it in your portal. Your Microsoft Azure portal will have those settings as available. Also, you can do it in PowerShell, which is the great thing, right? All these things that you can do from a GUI level, you can always do in PowerShell. And most of the time, there's actually more stuff that you can do in PowerShell that you can't even see from a GUI perspective. So the next phase of that Teams governance model, right, is certainly when it comes into Teams and Skype and that admin portal. This is where you're going to do most of your policy setting. So the cool thing about Teams is that you can set the administration level to different things, right? You certainly have your global admin that can oversee your whole entire Office 365, but then you also can get granular with your Teams administration. So you can break that up, and if you go review, I don't have it today in this slide, but you have different levels of team admin access. So you can obviously have full Teams access, but then you could have security teams, you could have communication teams, help desk teams that have different levels of administration control over the Teams portal. So really cool, you can break this up so you can have help desk be able to assist users at a certain level, and then if there's something else that needs to be set that maybe a policy level, you can have a Teams admin do that. So really granular way to spread that out. Some of the team settings are available as well, so you can set when who gets to be a user or an owner. You can set how those are set up. It really gets granular on that Teams admin portal. Device policies, another big part of that, right? As we journey to the Teams only mode, we're going to start to enable devices such as Teams phones, for example. And those Teams phones need to be administered from a firmware perspective, a security perspective. All this is part of your Teams portal, and you can certainly do that and leverage that capability. Messaging policies, right, is another one where you have the ability to control what you can see in messages in the chat. You know that there's Giphies and emoticons and all of that immense immersive collaboration. You can control the level of those, right? So some people might not need, some first line workers might not need that sort of that Giphy interaction or those emoticons. You can certainly control that via policy as well. Meeting policies too, right? So during a meeting, you have the ability to, or you could have the ability to record a meeting. You could have the ability to show video or audio, maybe share your screen or invite external participants in. All these are granular ways to control the access to that meeting, and you can set those policies via an organization-wide policy, or you can set them to a user-level policy. So you could maybe lock down a kiosk or something like that that individual users have. Live events, we're doing this, broadcasting a live event today. Obviously, live events is part of your Office 365 tenant. With that, you can produce a live event within Teams today. And so you want to also obviously have the ability to control that. Who gets to start a live event? If that live event is shared externally, like we're doing today to the public, or if you want live events just to be locked down to individual organizations or even groups. App policies. So as we all know, Teams has app policies that are built in by default, but you can certainly get these granular as well. The great thing about Teams is that it's an open concept where we actually have not only Microsoft applications, But third-party applications, right? SurveyMonkey, even WebEx and BlueJeans, everybody can make an app that associates and plugs right into Teams. And that shows you the power of Teams when third-party vendors are actually creating apps that fit right in, because they know Teams is that future collaboration tool, and they want to be able to be a part of that. Calling policies, obviously part of your Teams modalities that you can deploy is that voice and telephony feature. Certainly have calling policies that are involved in that. So for domestic calls, international calls, common area phones, all those are policies that you could apply at an org level as well as a user level. Migration planning, obviously one of the first couple of episodes that we've done on this broadcast is that migration, those modes of operation, how to set those at an org level and a user level that meets the best path for that collaboration experience for your end users. And then all this, right, kind of goes down into a reporting and analytics, is like, how many people are using Teams? What's the daily average usage? What's the monthly average usage? What vehicle are they coming from? Are they coming from a web device, web portal? Are they coming from mobile devices or a full client? So all this analytics allows you to judge and see proactively what's happening in your environment. Then finally, we can even get to a level where Teams is so powerful, right? We not only have the default application, but then we can add apps to it. Then we can add bots to it, right? So it's really cool that you can do all this stuff within the Teams portal as well. Allows for that governance not only from an AD level, from a group and naming concept, but to a Teams level.
Really quick, Patrick, this kind of goes back to, I think, your comment from guest access perspective or externally. We have a question. Do we have any way to share a file with someone who does not have Teams like we could in Box?
So does not have Teams. So everyone can get Teams, right? So Teams is great because you can utilize Teams from a web client. You don't even need a license to run Teams. There's a free trial of Teams itself. You can stop external access to that, but if you were to have somebody that joined from a Teams meeting from a web client, you could share files within that. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And then just from as we're talking on the topic of governance as well, can you talk a little bit about, from a team owner perspective, some of the channel moderation?
Yeah, so as team owner, right, you have the ability to control what's in there in that chat. So one of those things is you have the ability to control who deletes chats, right? Maybe in that persistent model, you don't want ability to even edit chats. So you can control that at a granular level as well.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, and just like the Azure portal and PowerShell, Teams is the same way, right? Teams obviously is, if you go to admin.teams.microsoft.com, you can admin your Teams portal right from a web page. Again, agnostic of what web page it is. The great thing about Microsoft now is we're open to all platforms, right? So if you want to administer the web page in Chrome, knock yourself out. If you want to do it in Edge, knock yourself out. If you want to do it in PowerShell, again, all your choice. If you're one of those PowerShell guys, all these things you can do from a PowerShell perspective. And then finally, let's get into a little bit about security. Geez, this half hour goes so fast. So the security and compliance admin is a big part of that. I hope that hasn't been on the whole time, that little window there. Retention policy on chats, right? It's a big thing. Since this chat is persistent, unlike the Skype world where it was set and forget and you deleted it and it was gone, persistency is a big part of the group chat experience in Teams. And you certainly want to have a governance model on the retention of those individual instant messages and chats that adheres to your compliance standards. Hold and e-discovery, right, is just like email in the day. Skype didn't have this model where we had e-discovery and archiving of the conversation. So we had no ability to discover it should we need to for a legal hold kind of reason. Teams is all compliant in that regard. Audit log searches. This is a big one. So auditing is not on by default when we fire up Teams because we have to turn it on at the admin level. But once you do, a lot of those things are answered, right? Is that who created this team? When did they create it? Who do they add as members? All of these little fine sand things that we need to know from an admin perspective are available in audit log searches. So I implore you, if that's part of your compliance standards is to know those answers, you need to turn on audit logging. Data subject requests, right? A big one in the security and compliance world. All these things, the great thing about Teams is that it's part of our Office 365 solution. All these compliance standards and security are built into the product. Information protection, we're going to actually go into this in a demo in a second, but obviously that's part of our overall solution. And then DLP, threat management, ATP, all these things that we wouldn't been able to leverage in Office 365 that we couldn't enable in Skype are completely enabled in Teams. Once again, if you need to administer the security and compliance, you have a security and compliance admin portal. And then once again, and finally, if you need to do it by PowerShell, you can, right? You completely up to you. Obviously, a lot of those bulk changes that you need to make, you're going to find PowerShell a much more effective tool than if you just have to do a one-off from a GUI command. So, as you can see, there's lots of tools available to you from an admin and Teams governance perspective. You have the power in your hands to pretty much control anything you need to do on a day-to-day basis to meet those compliance demands and governance demands of your individual users. I got a little bit up on a soapbox there about innovation and letting it go for a while, and that's really what I really wanted to get across. Is you have to paradigm shift the way you do and the way you've done things in the past, because it's a new world out there when it comes to collaboration. It's a new world out there when it comes to the generations that are working in your individual company. Is they do things differently than we did 20 and even 10 years ago, right? So kind of let that roll with you. Let you think about that and kind of design your governance model around that. So the last 9 minutes, let's do some demos, right? And let's look at some ways that that security comes into play, because that's a super important topic. That's more important every day, it seems like, in our world, as threats and takeovers and hacking come into play. We need to understand that, because security is so important that we've really put a lot of development and effort into meeting those standards of today. Because of all the collaboration tools that we have, we want to make sure that you can feel comfortable and feel empowered to employ those. So as you're rolling through your security and compliant path, let's look at a demo. This demo is, I implore you not to do this demo on site. Do this demo if you need to do it at your house. If you've never heard of Tor, the browser, Tor is notoriously used by hackers because it bounces IP addresses all over the world, and it's used usually for malicious intent. But in this example, I wanted to show you our known location technology when it comes to Teams, right? So obviously, as we go through and we have algorithms built into our security stack where we have known behavior of individual users that are logging in, what happens if you use Tor, right? And that bounces that IP address to somewhere across the world that user is typically never logged in from. That's odd behavior to Office 365 security. So what happens? So let's just try to use that Tor browser to log into Teams, right? And we're just going to go teams.microsoft.com. We're going to hit enter. And look what happens, right? We're going to go to our login page. I'm going to use my my demo user Brent here at TriLabs to log into my tenant. And I'm going to log in just like you did in a normal browser. But look what happens, right? I'm going to well, I forgot I had to enter my password. Let me enter my password real quick and then hit sign in. So what it's going to do, it's going to go to Office 365, and all of a sudden, Office 365 is going to say, hey, you've never used this browser before to log in to Teams, and this browser is not typically a browser that we see. So I'm going to need to verify your identity for me. So if you were to use Edge, like we are right here, right, you don't get that same experience. You literally can just log right in. It recognizes your user and your name as a normal browser and probably a normal IP range that I come in from. So it lets me just goes right in. But what happens when I use that Tor browser, right? And it's all of a sudden it says suspicious activity happens. Let's continue with that demo and show you what happens there. So let's go back to Tor. We'll finish logging in here. So suspicious activity detected. It's going to ask me to verify who I am. So now I'm going to go with a multi-factor authentication. I'm going to use my authenticator app to verify who I am. And that's going to be on my mobile device. So I'm just going to open up my authenticator and I'm going to hit approve. And guess what? I'm going to go back and it's going to say, okay, well, Brent is who he says he is. I'm going to continue logging in and allow him to come in, even if it's through Tor and it's a new browser, because he's authenticated himself with a whole other application. So some cool stuff that built right into your Office 365 solution that prevents malicious attacks and identity protection. So let's go into Intune management real quick. And we're going to do a sign in from my phone, right from my device. Sign in here. Going to type, I'm going to use the same user, Brent. I'm going to sign in. And look what happens the first time I sign in. I'm going to type in my password here. If you want to slow down the screen, you can probably see what it is, but I don't care. So the first time I come in through Intune, right, it's the very first time I've logged in, I'm going to come up with the terms of usage for my individual user, because I'm going to have to register that device with Intune in order to have it have any sort of policies and stuff pushed down to it so it can adhere to the quality standards of my individual user. So I can scroll down. I don't have to read it, but you should read it and hit accept there. And then it's going to tell me my organization is going to protect the data on my app. So cool little things, tools that you can utilize today with your Office 365 tenant to protect not only your end users, but your devices itself. All right, so we're going to access our school data. It forces me to come into and use a passcode. I'm going to pick a 4-digit PIN here. Apply that to my my device, so that I have to use that when I log into my tenant from now on with that device. And that way, that device is now Intune compliant, and I can go forward with my individual user. So Office ATP. I got 3 minutes to burn through these demos. Okay, so Office ATP, cool. So what happens once we get into that threat protection within the Teams client itself? We've logged in through a great browser, our phone, we're Intune compliant. Now I have information that we're going to utilize in the Teams compliant section of the chat and see what happens. So let's go and we'll just pretend Brent and Emily are talking here. I'm gonna send them a spam link. Right, and that spam link should automatically raise eyebrows to Emily that, hey, this is probably not a great thing to go to, but I trust Brent. He's never sent me anything bad before, so Emily's going to trust Brent, and she's going to say, all right, I guess we'll just click on it and see what happens. So I'm going to click on it, and guess what it's going to do? SafeLinks is going to create a web page for me saying, hey, that's a malicious web page because that's a safe link that was sent, even though on the surface it didn't look like a safe link. It is within built into ATP. It's going to protect you with that, so you can't go to malicious sites even if they're sent via Teams. Okay, 2 minutes. Here we go. Information barriers. So what information barriers is this, right? Say we have 2 different divisions. Say we're on a marketing team and we have maybe a Coke team and we have a Pepsi team, and we never want those people to talk, right? We could actually create information barriers to stop those 2 groups from talking to each other. They don't want to share information. So see what happens when Isaiah tries to utilize, hey, you around to Chris? He gets denied because there's an information barrier protocol set up there. On the other side, you can see, well, if you want to learn more, you can obviously go and review the information barriers. This is available to you today. You can utilize this concept. But what happens on the other side? So, hey, you around, whoever sent that is going to get that message that they couldn't send it because of policy. But on the other side, they're just going to see the ability to not get that message, right? So some cool things is that when they try to send that, it's just going to say the administrator has disabled your chat. So information barriers can be set up subsequently after they've been chatting back and forth, because you can see they were talking at one point. I set up information barriers, boom, I've now shut that ability to talk and communicate off. So let's go into another demo here. We're going to show you what Emily's doing. and she's been removed from that chat. So once we enable information barrier, you can see that Emily has been removed from that, no longer has the ability to chat within that that team. We're gonna go one more demo and then we're gonna turn it off. I know I'm gonna go 1 minute over, but you can stay with me. So this is what happens for protection. What happens if we send credit cards back and forth, right? So the ability to understand and identify credit card numbers, right? We can actually identify that, and then as soon as we identify that pattern, we can then by policy pull that email back or that instant message back and show you that information has been blocked. So really cool stuff that you can do. And then not only do we pull that information back, but we can actually give that user the reason why it was pulled back. So some of those cool things that we can do today, I know I'm probably, well, actually right on time, so perfect. I just wanted to kind of review what that governance model looks like, what that security model looks like, and that administration model looks like, and some of those demos that you can do today to operate and administer your teams. So I hope you've enjoyed these 3 series that we've done from Skype to Teams. There's not a ton of time to touch on all the topics, and that's what I implore you to get with your account team and get with your CSM, your customer success manager, so they can drive these conversations a little bit longer than 30 minutes and really go in depth in your model and your roadmap. So I appreciate it. I really appreciate you coming and learning today for 30 minutes. So enjoy your day, and I'll talk to you later.